everyone, and welcome to episode 300 of Milwaukee's Tailgate Brewers podcast, part of the MKE Tailgate Network. I am James, joined by Ryan, and stepping in for Paul on this momentous occasion, one of the OGs, Steve Garshinsky, here with us. Steve, how are you doing?
Yeah, short notice, so I make no guarantees that I know what's going on.
Oh, it's fine. That makes for the more entertaining podcast anyway, as history has shown us if you go through the archives.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so we'll talk plenty about the 300 episode anniversary. Anniversary is not the right word, but we'll mark 300 episodes. We got some questions about some of our favorite moments that we'll close up the show with. But first of all, how are you guys' weekends doing? Steve, I know you went to the Badger game, set a record for heat.
Yeah, I went to the game. It was hot, and you should have warned me that literally every other road was closed in Madison.
Oh, it's bad now. Yeah.
So driving through an isthmus with all that traffic made that, I think it took us about an hour to get back to my parents' home on the east side. It was ridiculous.
You're surprised that there's construction in Madison?
It's not just the construction, it's the way that it's like completely closed down like roads. Like I didn't realize Dayton was closed. And that's always kind of my extra like, oh, I'm going to get around some of the other traffic and hop down to certain areas and stuff like that. Completely closed. Lanes were out and it was everywhere. East side, west side, downtown. I was like, oh my God, if this isn't done soon, like the entire season, like you better plan a day getting to and from a Badger game. And it never used to be like that.
Yeah, it's going to be an issue between the just, usual Madison road construction and issues with driving on an isthmus. You've got the bus rapid transit system construction. So basically every major thoroughfare has lane reductions on it, like East Wash is a mess. Just east to west, basically everything down to West Town. So yeah, getting around for Badgers games is a nightmare. There were also a couple other events downtown on Saturday, and it was hot as hell on top of it. So yeah, I don't envy any of you. I did not want to mess around with any of that, but I hope you had a good time at the game, Steve.
I don't know how people opposite the press box made it through watching that game because it was so hot. We were luckily we were in the shade, but I couldn't imagine just sitting there and getting baked by the sun for that entire time. And there were breaks. You talk about a game that needs to work on its pace of play. There were times where
football,
I swear I looked up and we were like 15 minutes between like actual action plays, where you'd hit a break and they'd kick an extra point and they'd go to break and then they'd kick, do a kickoff and there'd be a break and somebody'd get hurt. And there were a bunch of times it happened. I was like, this is ridiculous. Somebody needs to figure out a way to manage this. If baseball could do it, everybody should be able to do it.
Yes, that is absolutely true. Like you can get that stuff fixed and figured out and get these things clipping along at a little bit better pace. But remember, I mean, football, even more so than anything else, football is just a TV show. So they're just, everything's planned around like, getting the broadcast, getting the commercials in, doing all that stuff. Like it's not even for the people in the stadium anymore, which is part of why it's just,
No, it's fun to be at the game, but it's brutal as far as like a product when you're just there watching because, it's not made to be there in the stands and watching the game.
Yeah.
No, especially when you have kids, Steve, I'm sure. They're like, as hell.
Yeah, I had my son along and he was doing okay for a little while, but, we're like 2.5 hours into the game, which was about halftime. And he's like, how long is this game? I'm like, we got a while.
Yeah. And that's the other thing. Those college halftimes will kill you. Because they run for a solid 20 minutes because they don't start until everybody is in the locker room. That's when they start that countdown.
The halftime, and then they have a DJ there now, and I think they had all of the speakers cranked to 11.
Oh, yeah. Mark was complaining about that.
It was literally painful.
Oh boy,
like sitting there, it was that loud, and I'm like, no, I get it. They're trying to do a different entertainment thing. It's not like your old standard college football. It was like literally painful. That was the other reason my son was like, when is this game over? Because my ears ache. And I'm like, great, we got hearing damage.
Well, he's getting an early start for his concert going career.
Yeah, you hear that ringing in your ears? Don't worry, you just keep doing this, and eventually it'll just numb itself away.
Right, yeah.
You stop paying attention to it. Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, we got some Brewer stuff to talk about on this 300th episode. But first, as always, you can help support us. Throw a few bucks our way. Keep this ad free at patreon.com/MKE tailgate. $2 a month guarantees you get your questions answered both on this podcast and on reporting as eligible, while $5 gets you that perk plus some additional exclusive content, including the minor league extra with Ryan and James Anderson of RotoWire. And Ryan, I know you guys have been kind of working on your organizational system ranking. So how's that going?
Yeah, we just released the episode on Friday. So the organizational top 15s are out and mostly similar. I was actually surprised how similar our rankings were kind of throughout. Even once we got into kind of the middle part of it, that end part when you start getting into like 11, 12, 13, we had most of the same guys. There were only a few differences, and some of it was honestly just like he didn't have Abner Uribe as eligible and I did. So I had him on my list and he didn't, but he would have had him right about where I had him. So yeah, it is really interesting how deep this farm system is now, where you could legitimately go to 15 and then go well beyond that and still be talking about guys who have very legitimate big league upside. So it's fantastic to have this kind of farm system right now.
Absolutely. So yeah, you can pick that up over on the Patreon site. Get the link there. I know Paul also had a reporting as eligible mini pod there as well, kind of taking a look at the NFC North. So that exclusive content really starting to come in now that we're into Packers season, just about a week away from the Packers opener. But as we talk about that, the Brewers now into Craigtember. As we talked about last week, they got off to a good start in Craigtember with 2 wins against the Phillies. Couldn't quite finish the sweep on Sunday. Wade Miley kind of left out there a little bit too long, and it ended up costing the Brewers on Sunday. But nice little rebound after losing 2 or 3 to the Cubs earlier in the week. Those really lucky Cubs with a couple of 1-run wins. Yeah. 1-run wins obviously don't count, as Cub fans have said in the past. So they're just really lucky there. The Cubs win on Sunday and the Brewers loss means that the Brewers NL Central lead is now at about, I think it's 3.5 with 26 games to play. So still a decent amount of cushion there, but also just looming in the background is that final series against the Cubs to end the year. So anything 3 games and under is basically, grounds for that last series truly making the difference. So with that in mind, let's just jump right into the Cubs series. We've got a Patreon question from Brew Crew fan in California asking, the Cubs got so lucky in those last 2 games against the Brewers. What type of horseshoe are they using? Also, congrats on 300, guys. So, Ryan, do you want to take this opportunity to, complain about the horseshoe-ness of it all?
Sure. I mean, this is that game. Well, the game on Tuesday was really particularly frustrating because the Brewers were hitting balls that on even like a normal day at Wrigley would go out, but because the wind was blowing in hard, I think they had 2 or 3 clear ones that would have been out on most days, and maybe another one too that on a day when the wind was blowing out certainly would have gone out too. So they were definitely like out hitting the Cubs, and they had more those second and third games. They were out hitting the Cubs, they were out walking the Cubs, they were doing everything except getting the hit to drive in the run with scoring position. And they had been on a very good run. During that winning streak that they were on, they had a batting average over 400 with runners in scoring position. So hitting with runners in scoring position hadn't been a problem until that moment, which kind of tells you what hitting with runners in scoring position is about. But even in those 2 games, I looked it up. In those 2 games, they were 2 for 8 both of those days. So they hit 250 with runners in scoring position. It's just that they weren't extra base hits and they weren't able to get anything else going. There were no home runs in those games. And so things were kind of miserable in those games offensively. And the Cubs were able to eke out a couple of lucky wins. I mean, that game on Wednesday was classic. They ended up hitting one off Peguero's leg, or was it Piamps? It was Piamps.
I think it was Piamps.
Yeah, they hit one off Piamps' leg to win the game. Like that was how they got their hit. They were having trouble getting the ball out of the infield, and that's how they win the game. So congratulations to them on that. That's wonderful. But yeah, like, kiss our ass about this this horseshoe crap.
Steve, any thoughts on the luckiness or unluckiness of the Brewers in the last week against the Cubs?
I mean, they did what they needed to do by taking one,
Sure.
and basically limiting the damage. You give up one game. It's not ideal, but it's not a backbreaker by any means. So, they got the win they needed right away, and then they were kind of playing with house money a little bit. It would have been nice to get a second win and knock the Cubs back even further, but, they're still in the driver's seat right now. So it was, I don't want to say it completely successful, but, it was successful enough for the team going forward. And then, the way they played in the Philly series, they showed it was fine.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. So Brad Westness has our next question saying, congrats on getting Craig Timber onto a national broadcast. I believe it was the Fox game on Saturday night.
Yeah.
They mentioned Craig Timber. Brad's asking, how do you feel about the strength of the schedule to end the season between the Brewers, Cubs, and Reds? Ryan, I know we've kind of talked about this a little bit, but you've got the actual schedules pulled up. What do we have?
Yeah, so the winning percentages here are with today's games figured in. So actually the Brewers playing a better team in the Phillies than the Cubs playing the Reds, a slightly worse team. These numbers are even a little bit better than this. The Brewers have a remaining winning percentage of their opponents of 476. They have 3 at Pittsburgh and 3 at the Yankees coming up this week. And then they come home and host Miami and Washington. Miami for 4, Washington for 3. And then they're back out on the road for their last road trip of the regular season. They have 4 at St. Louis and then 3 at Miami. That road trip looms a little scary. You could just that one feels like the kind of road
Nothing
trip
good will happen during that week.
Things can really go sideways for you on that, especially because Miami has always been kind of a pain for them because it doesn't play well for hitting home runs. And this is a team that's less attuned to hitting home runs and less dependent on them than some of the past teams have been. But they still really do need to hit home runs, and they're not as good at it as they were in the past. So you do kind of worry about that. We'll see kind of where Miami's at as we go through this, but those are those games. And then they come home and finish with 3 against the Cardinals and 3 against the Cubs to wrap the season. So again, 476 is the winning percentage with today's games still in there for the Brewers. For the Cubs, their opponents are basically right at 500, 497. They play this week at home, and they've got the Giants and the Diamondbacks in there for 4, actually. Diamondbacks are in there for 4 coming up next weekend. And then they go on the road to Colorado and to Arizona. So the way we've got, a playoff contender, a team that's in playoff position in the Marlins, we've got both a home and away against them. They've got Arizona, who's also kind of in just about that same boat, right?
Yeah.
And they've got a home and away against them as well. So they've got that. And then, like the Brewers, they've got a series against Pittsburgh at home. Or I guess our series is at Pittsburgh. Theirs is at home. They've also got Colorado at home. So they have Colorado home and away. And then they finish, obviously, on the road with 3 at Atlanta. And that sounds like, oh, good, they're playing Atlanta. But Atlanta probably has everything wrapped up at that point. Sure. And you kind of wonder if, like, that especially might be a series where they really sit a lot of their regulars and then kind of ramp them back up for the final series of the year. Atlanta I'm talking about. So you wonder they may not get the full Atlanta experience there, which, horseshoe for them. So, and then we've got obviously the 3 to end the season at Milwaukee. I was starting to do the Cincinnati one. Their opponents have a 475 record the rest of the way, but Cincinnati's 6.5 back. They're not out of it,
it's more of a wild card situation for them now, right?
They're really fighting for just trying to squeak into the playoffs. I think at this point they would have to get insanely hot down the stretch for that to work out, and it's possible, but they didn't get the pitching that I'm sure were really hoping they got. All of that went north to Cleveland. The 3 guys that were put on waivers all ended up in Cleveland, but they did get Harrison Bader and Hunter Renfroe. So they got some help in their lineup, which they didn't really necessarily seem to need. I don't quite know what was going on there, but they didn't get the pitching that I'm sure they were hoping. I mean, we were hoping that Matt Moore might make it to us too, but you kind of knew there was no way that was happening. So that was a crazy thing. My brother has largely stopped paying attention to baseball for the most part, and he as soon as he saw it, he called me and he's like, "What the hell is going on here with all these teams throwing all these guys on waivers?" And I was like, "Well, they're trying to get under the luxury tax, and it sounds like nobody's actually sure, but the Angels may not have actually done it." According to one, I think Fangraphs was saying they just barely got under the luxury tax threshold, but somebody else who did it was saying they didn't get under the luxury tax threshold. So this whole thing may not have even worked for the Angels, which is kind of ridiculous. But yeah, weird thing.
All right. Well, it wouldn't be the 300th episode of Milwaukee's Tailgate without some technical difficulties. We lost Ryan halfway through that. Classic instance of the Milwaukee's Tailgate podcast. Somebody's computer crashing or internet dropping, ranting against charters. So, we got an early start on that. But let's move on. We've got next question here from Made Wiley this week asking, the vibes right now are incredible, but I'm worried about Yelich. Tell me why I shouldn't be. Steve, for some reason, I think you're the one to answer this question. Should we be worried about Yelich? Is he no longer back to bring back another Milwaukee's Tailgate trope, or should we be worried?
I think you should be worried because this is just what he does. Every time we think like, oh, he's back. No, he hits these just periods where he completely disappears, and I don't know how long it's going to be for. Hopefully he figures it out before the end of the month, because it would be nice. Even he still wasn't hitting with a ton of power, but it would be nice if on base Yelich returned. Like, we could really use that. So I don't know, maybe the off day today helped, even though he did get one at bat late. We'll see if that helps, but at this point I have no answers for who Christian Yelich is going forward. There's no way to project what he's actually going to do at any point. So all we can do is, I guess, say a prayer and hope we get one of the hot runs at the right time.
So in August, and this was with a bad end to the month of August, because he was actually, when I looked at this on like the 20th, he had an on-base percentage up about 400 for the month, and then slumped in those last 10 days pretty hard. He still ended up with a 248, 353, 324 line. So the problem here, again, is the power disappeared. Like, that is the issue more than anything else. He was still taking his walks. His batting average, 248 is still fine. Like, that's better than the league average in terms of batting average. So he's still doing okay there. It really just was that the power, again, disappeared on him. And that's why it was nice to see him pop one at Wrigley that was Monday night. But that was also wind aided. So who knows? But
hey, we can't complain about the wind stopping home runs and then, complain about it helping a home run for us. So,
well, no, I'm not complaining about it. I'm just saying it was wind aided. Like, he
take the good with the bad there.
Yeah. He popped it out, and it was definitely helped by the wind. It would have been close, I think, without the wind, but it was, because it wasn't like it dropped into the basket. It went a few rows up there, but the wind was definitely blowing out that night when he hit it. So 2 left, which is where he hit it. He didn't pull it. So, but honestly, if he's getting on base at a 353 clip, that's not killing you. That he's still doing a decent enough job getting on in front of the guys who are now newly hitting for quite a bit of power in the middle of the lineup. So
his last 28 days is like 327.
That was August. Month of August, he had a 353 on base percentage.
Okay. Well, yeah. I'm just telling you, the last 28 days, that breakdown is 327. So
you
get off of like one hot day there right at the beginning of the month. And yeah, it was a lot worse than it even seems there. So
yes. Well, it turns out that, small samples can do weird things like that. But yeah.
Well, he's getting a pretty large sample of like disappearing for big chunks of the season.
Wait, so it's a big sample and a small sample all at once?
Christian Yelich is being mediocre to bad at times, and stretches of being very bad. Like we have a lot of examples of that. So
not so much this year. I mean, he got off to a slow start.
What do you mean not so much this year? Did you watch April?
Yeah, I was just gonna say he
And
got off
April
to a slow
counts.
656 OPS in April, 842 in May, 912 in June, over 1,015 in July, and then back down to 676 in August. So yeah, couple months.
All I can say is his arbitration hearing next year is going to be rough.
Yelich's? He has a contract, Steve.
Yeah, that's a joke.
That was the joke.
That's the joke.
That's the joke.
All right. Moving on, let's talk about another potential bat that we're just going to hope ends up being good in September. The Brewers signed Josh Donaldson right before the deadline to add guys to be postseason eligible. You know, Ryan mentioned the Brewers didn't get any of the guys that were through on waivers. Josh Donaldson just straight up released by the Yankees because he was old and very bad for them. And Brewers decided to take a shot, see if they could get a hot month out of him, sent him to AAA to get some at-bats because he hasn't been active since about June or so, right? So from what I saw, drew a walk in his Nashville debut, probably going to be up at some time in September. So that leads us to Lucroy Suitcase's question here, asking, does the signing of Josh Donaldson indicate the end of the line for Monasterio? So, you know, Ryan, I know a couple of months ago we were talking about Andrew Monasterio and like, did the Brewers just, you know, find a diamond in the rough here, and things have kind of slowed down significantly in August for him. So do you think this is just a sign that the Brewers are kind of over that experiment, or are they just trying to throw spaghetti at the wall to see if anything can stick in September?
Yeah, this is classic throw spaghetti at the wall. This is exactly what Paul talks about. That's what this is more than anything. Okay, so the whole Josh Donaldson thing, there's a extensive history. If you're listening to this, you probably know his incident with Tim Anderson last summer with the White Sox was really, really a terrible look. Him basically calling Tim Anderson Jackie, because in an interview Tim Anderson had talked about, he had compared how, you know, what he's going through is in its own way kind of similar to that, and talking about that. And so Donaldson saw fit to taunt him by calling him Jackie, even though Anderson asked him to stop and told him he didn't appreciate it. And then it ended up in a brawl. And that made all kinds of national news, and then he was suspended, and there was all of this nonsense. He has a reputation as being a prickly guy in the clubhouse generally, even beyond stuff like that. So, like, bringing in that amount of baggage is its own thing, and it makes this whole thing kind of hard to swallow for me. Like, it's hard for me to, like, go beyond that. I know that that's actually the next question. Sorry, I jumped ahead there. But this whole thing is kind of difficult for me to even, like, look at the baseball side of this, because the guy is just seemingly a jackass. And
regardless of all that, he sucks. He sucks.
There's that too.
He sucks. He for the Yankees last year, he's 36 years old, and he completely fell off, which at that age, it's not going to be a surprise. He was worse this year. I mean, he sucks. I don't know what they think they're going to. I don't know if they believe that they're going to get a month of good production from him this year, but that seems unlikely. So yeah, it's probably more if Monasterio could play consistent defense at third. I think it would be less
the issue.
Yeah, it would be less of a need to go out and find like a legitimate replacement for him, because they'd at least trudge through with the defense. But yeah, his shakiness in the field, I think, is really necessitated trying to find something. Unfortunately, this was the something, and it's not really going to help.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to really work from a baseball perspective either. So, yeah, like all of it just seems, it is trying to throw spaghetti against the wall and seeing what sticks. And he had been hurt. That's why he's actually he hasn't played since, I think, early July here. He needed to do rehab outings to show that he could actually still like get out there and play. What his defense is at this point is somewhat questionable too. Fangraphs has him as a positive defender this year. I don't know if you can even remotely trust that in the sample size that we have, but Yeah, I mean, this is really a problem driven by. Well, we have a question about it, so we'll get to that in a minute. But it's really driven by that more than anything.
Sure. So speaking of that question, Dave Penshorn asking, so Josh Donaldson, do we really need to test the mental fragility of the locker room in back-to-back seasons? We have good vibes going and the team seems to be gelling. Inject the enigma that are Monasterio and Miller into my veins. By the way, did you know that Owen Miller's from Wisconsin? So yeah, Owen Miller's back, obviously, at least for the time being. But yeah, Steve, it's just kind of an example of third base being such a disaster right now, right?
I mean, maybe that's the solution is you get another Owen Miller hot streak that you can just kind of ride until he turns into just total garbage again. That would be the hope. And it's probably what you're hoping for from Donaldson. And Miller at least could potentially do that without, pissing everybody off in the locker room. So unless, I don't know, maybe Craig Counsell can manage Donaldson's attitude or at least just keep him sectioned away from everybody to just go out, play, and then leave.
Well, I would hope he learned his lesson after what happened last year to just not be aggressively abusive to people in the context of baseball. Seriously,
I don't know if you've had
those types of people can't really help it.
That's that's the fear. I don't know. Maybe he just you didn't even see the error of his ways, but just realized he has to keep his mouth shut. And if he keeps his mouth shut, we're talking about a month and a half here.
Yeah, he's a 37-year-old catching on with a contending team, trying to ring chase at this point, right? So maybe he plays well. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you have to hope and think that he's just not going to, be that guy openly.
It's 2023. We know those idiots aren't going to shut up.
Yeah,
we have ample proof that that's just what we live with nowadays is, if you're an asshole like that, you're just going to keep spouting off. So we'll see where that goes.
Yeah. I mean, what would you say are the chances that he ever plays for the Brewers? I mean, it's definitely not a lock that he's on this roster, right? That he ends up playing for the Brewers?
But does he have a better chance of playing for the Brewers or appearing on Newsmax?
All right, let's move on. My Only Lemonade has a question also related to the third base situation here, asking or saying first, congrats on 300. This podcast has made it much easier to be a Brewers fan living in Iowa. Well, thank you for that very much, and glad to be of service. And I'm sorry for all the Cubs fans that live in Iowa. But the question here, I was pretty annoyed to see Owen Miller called back up to the active roster, especially since Brian Anderson is right there and hasn't played in a game since August 22nd. Any thoughts on why he seems to be glued to the bench? I will admit, Ryan, I had just assumed he was on the injured list for a second there because he hasn't played so long, but no, he's allegedly healthy and just sitting there. So what's the deal?
I wish I knew. There's something very bizarre going on in that situation, particularly where if Craig Counsell isn't going to play him, why is Matt Arnold keeping him on the active roster? Is there a disagreement there about whether or not he should be playing? Because frankly, I don't get it. I don't understand how you can have him sitting there, especially with all the issues that they've had at third base defensively. If he's broken down, well, shouldn't he be on the IL and not taking up a roster spot? This one is really, really weird to me. I don't understand why he's on the roster and not playing to the extent that he is. It makes no sense.
Yeah, I don't know. Steve, do you think he could help or contribute in some way?
Apparently not, because it really does seem like if he could, he'd be out there.
Instead of Monasterio, right?
Yeah, exactly. Again, with all of the areas of, the game at third base that they need help with, because they could use him just defensively, even if he can't hit. Yeah, if they're not playing him, there has to be something wrong. So, yeah, I don't know. But, yeah, like you said, I don't know why he wouldn't then be on the injured list if that's the case.
Yeah.
Hide him somewhere and use that roster spot.
Yeah, the only explanation I have is that there's a legitimate disagreement between the coaching staff and the front office on this because nothing else really makes sense. What else could it be? Why would they have him out there taking up a roster spot and not playing at all?
Are there any other weird postseason roster rules that they would need to keep him active just to make sure he can play in the postseason?
No, he just needs to be on the 40-man, which he was going to be regardless. So that part of it doesn't make any difference whatsoever. It just doesn't.
That's what I figured. I was just checking. I'm like, is there a rule that we don't know about that they could be trying to get around in some way? But yeah, if he's just injured, I don't know why he wouldn't be on the IL at this point.
And this seems to be a recurring thing with Brian Anderson, where just as the season goes on, he just isn't available to play for long stretches. I think usually he ends up on the IL, and he was on the IL for the Brewers for quite a while too. But yeah, him breaking down. When they made this signing, we said, great, we want to get 2 or 3 good months out of Brian Anderson, and then when he breaks down, we will go on and figure something else out. We'll go on and do something else with this position. And that was kind of the way this was all headed, but now he's back on the active roster and not playing. So I don't quite get what's going on here. It's very bizarre.
Well, when we were talking about that too, it was, okay, he'll get a good 1 or 2 months in for his hot streak, which happened, and then the Brewers will just shuffle him off and play Luis Urias, who will be back at that point, and that's not what happened. And now Luis Urias is in Boston, and I don't want to question whether it was a good idea to make that trade if they were just going to non-tender him anyway, and he hasn't been spectacular. He has a 710 OPS with the Red Sox right now, and his only 2 home runs were the 2 grand slams he hit against the Yankees. But when you're talking about Josh Donaldson possibly being a solution, it kind of just makes you wonder if this all just went awry and nothing has gone according to plan there, right?
Yeah, it's certainly extremely strange. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But third base has been a cursed position for them for a little while now. They've just had real trouble figuring out exactly what to do there. Though Luis Urias, I shouldn't crap on him too much, because in 2021, 2022, he was a very cromulent third baseman, even though he didn't hit for the power people associate with the position so much. But he was a 2 to 3 win player both of those years, and that's perfectly fine. But this year it's been a nightmare. Yeah.
All right. Price Trozen has the next question this week, asking, the Colin Ray Smoke and Mirrors placeholder act was Craig Timberishly effective. Will the Brewers require his Doug Henning magic show again, or will there be other plans? Happy 300. So, Steve, Colin Ray didn't get through 5 innings, but at least pitched decently well, at least racked up the strikeouts. Do we see him again in September, do you think?
I think with the schedule they have, do they have enough off days that they can get by without having that extra starter?
Well, they do have an off day coming on Thursday, so if they wanted to shorten it up, they could do that, but Council's been hesitant to do that.
And they just came off a stretch where they had a bunch of off days.
Yes, they did.
Because when they played that Twin series, they had 2 in the week. So, I mean, I think if they're pitching him right now with all of those off days, they're probably going to keep doing it because they want to keep that pitching staff as fresh as possible. So I think until he proves that he's just completely ineffective and overmatched, they'll probably keep sending him out there to see what they can get out of him. And I don't know, they're kind of bullpen-ish days when he pitches, knowing, he'll eat a few innings, but he's not going to give you a great start.
Yeah, what he did yesterday was really pretty cool. They got 4 1/3 out of him, and then when they got down to the bottom of the order, the Phillies had decided to stack 2 lefties at the bottom of the order, and then a third lefty, Schwarber, at the top of the order. So they had 3 lefties in a row, and I'm sure they were salivating there to get that shot. And Council did classic Craig Timber. I brought this up on Twitter. This was a classic Craig Timber thing where he brought in Chafin, and the whole point was just, I'm going to use him to face these 3 batters. That's his assignment, 3 lefties in a row, and his job is just to get these batters. And, he had the platoon advantage, and these were guys at the bottom of the order. And it worked as well as you would hope something like that would work, where you're giving a guy, this is a pretty cake assignment for for somebody in that situation for Chafin, and he came through with flying colors. And this is really how, to a larger extent, how they managed things in 2018 and 2019 in September and had so much success, was by just doing this over and over and over again with kind of mediocre middle relief talent, but getting them positioned in the right spot to have success. And so, yeah, you can't do this as much as the Brewers used to, but when you have a moment like this where you're able to still employ something like this, Craig showed that like he still has that in him and still has that knack for being able to sort of work his way through something like that. So that was really cool to see. It was very much a throwback moment.
Next question this week comes from Luke Zimmerman saying, episode 300, enough counting stats to enter the podcast Hall of Fame? I don't know about that, but maybe that, what's the Brewers one, the Wall of Honor, that has just basically the counting stats, basically saying, you've been here a long time, so here's a plaque. Maybe that's what we get.
The one for we remember these guys.
Yeah, remembering some guys, remembering some podcasts. We've at least qualified for that. Anyway.
You know, I remember when Marin hit his 300th and like he made a big deal about it. And then since then, like I don't think he's really done like big anniversary episodes.
Well,
so,
we did big things for 100 and 200, 300 falling on Labor Day weekend in the midst of a pennant race. Made it a little bit more sketchy where it was like, yeah, this is going to be a big deal.
Maybe I think maybe
more.
Yeah, maybe you can mention 500. Otherwise, you're looking at 1,000 before you really like get celebratory again.
Oh, yeah. I can't even contemplate 1,000. Like I can't even.
Yeah, no, we'll be dead by then. It's fine. Yeah.
Inevitable heat death of the universe will definitely beat that out.
Yes. Anyway, Luke has real questions. Luke's saying, Canna and Santana appear to have been great trade deadline additions so far. So 2 questions here. Number 1, who are the best trade deadline bats picked up during the Stearns-Arnold era? And number 2, are either of Santana or Canna potential players for next year's roster? So, Steve, let's start with you. I guess who comes to mind as some of the best bats the Brewers have picked up recently at the deadline?
Yeah, I mean, outside of Canna and Santana, and Canna probably seems to be the guy who's been the best bat that they've picked up at the deadline in the Stearns-Arnold era. It's probably Mike Moustakas. He came in and plugged in that hole. Yeah, 2018, he plugged in the hole at third base, and he was, I think like a 104 OPS plus guy, something like that. So, I mean, he did a decent job with the bat. I think he brought a little, power with him and stuff like that. And actually, he had a really good postseason that year. So, yeah, Moustakas is really the only other guy in the running because, I mean, you have like Jonathan Scope.
You actually missed one. I got another one, Steve. I found one.
Oh, did you find another good one?
Yeah, I did. Eduardo Escobar in 2021.
Yeah.
115.
Okay, there we go.
115 OPS plus. He had a straight 800 OPS with the Brewers, which was 15%.
I felt like I was missing somebody in there that they brought.
Well, he was a weird
then
one.
He got hurt.
Was the other one.
He got hurt at the end of the year.
Yeah.
And missed the playoffs, right?
No, I think he came back. Him and Adames both got hurt in September, and that's when they went on that losing streak to finish the season. Everything just kind of fell apart, and then they got into the postseason against Atlanta, and it just, it all kind of went to crap at that point offensively. But yeah, he was quite good when he came over in that trade for the Brewers, and really added to a group that had already been bolstered by Rowdy and by Willy Adames and Dan Vogelbach as well that year. So they had a lot of replacements that came in and really bolstered that offense and made it look a lot better. But then it just, it fizzled in September and into October.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because both Canna and Santana had some slow starts. So where they end, obviously, I think that'll be interesting to see how that goes. Especially, Canna playing left field, subbing for the slumping Christian Yelich. I guess it's the thing you got to do.
But yeah, I mean, Canna this year, coming into Sunday was a 118 OPS plus. So with also a straight 800 OPS. So that's funny that those were the same when we looked at them.
Yeah, and I think the second question here then too, who of those two possibly could contribute next year. I will say Canna does technically have a team option for $11.5 million, but it's only like $5 million to turn it down. So Ryan, what are the odds that actually gets picked up?
Yeah, it's a weird one. I wonder if he finishes really well and does great things, barring some sort of insane like run to the World Series or something. Where I think that would be the kind of thing, like if Mark Canha was a big player for them on a World Series run, yeah, it's the kind of guy you just be like, yep, we'll bring you back. That's fine. We'll just run it back. And then when he fizzles next year, you just let him go and it's fine and whatever. But people always like to see as much of a championship team or even a team that like goes to the World Series. They want to see as much of it run back as possible, even if it's not particularly advisable. And in this case, I think both Santana and Canha, first off, the Brewers already have too many outfielders, for the future. With the return of Mitchell, presumably the relatively early promotion of Jackson Chourio, you're already looking at like having too many outfielders. They probably are going to need to do something else with Tyrone Taylor already, I would imagine.
I mean, they have a lot of outfielders, but they don't have necessarily, guaranteed offensive production from those outfielders.
But that's not really Canha either. Like he's fine offensively, but he's not. Yeah, he's not like a star offensively. He's not even like Hunter Renfroe good.
Compared to like Joey Wiemer or somebody like that, who's really, they're very limited. We don't know what Mitchell will do in a full season. I'm just saying, there are a lot of question marks where I think Canha, you'd have a baseline, though he's old. I mean, he's 35 next year.
But you also, like, those guys have upside, and they're going to need to make sure they give plate appearances to these guys to see what they have and to give them the chance to develop into the, solid big leaguers that I think they all can be. So you need to give that room and that space. So that having Canha around makes that harder to do.
Sure, but someone like Wiemer might benefit from being able to just not be exposed as much.
Yeah, except that Wiemer, Wiemer's going to need to hit right-handed pitching in the big leagues to see if he can hit right-handed pitching in the big leagues. I think we already know.
Oh no, I get that, but maybe he needs limited appearances, a little bit, the ability to put up a better stat line, and then once he's got his legs under him after like a season or so of limited appearances, you can see if he can basically make that adjustment against right-handed pitching. But like I said, until you see that. He needs to have some success. They need to have a successful run for him. And I think that might be a matter of limiting his appearances a little bit.
Yeah, I think you have to give him the chance to just play a lot more than anything. Down the stretch of a pennant race, you limit him because you have games to win, and it's really important to do that. In April, May, June of a season, when you're already introducing a lot of young players, I think you want to have him get a lot of plate appearances to see what he can do and how he can progress.
If you do, I think then you're looking at a shorter timeline of is Joey Wiemer a Brewer for a significant stretch.
I mean, it's possible. Things could change.
If he gets that many appearances, if he's doing if they do what you're saying, and he again struggles against right-handed pitching the way he has, I don't know how long he has on this team, other than as a, fourth-ish outfielder coming in as a defensive replacement.
Well, sure, he becomes Tyrone Taylor basically.
Yeah,
right? Like playing lefties and filling.
Yeah, you're switching those guys,
and that might be what they do for a little while with him until you keep giving him chances, and if he ends up not being able to ever hit right-handed pitching, then those chances will become more and more limited over time, and maybe he isn't on the team anymore at that point. But I think you have to give him chances for a while.
He's not a young prospect either.
No, not particularly. Yeah, he's gonna be 25.
He's already 20? Yeah, he'll be 25.
Yeah. No.
Like I said, they're gonna have to make some decisions on him, I think, in an accelerated time frame a little bit more.
Yeah, but I think you're still. I would say they probably still want to see more of him.
If they have as much talent as you say they have, then he's going to need to show it right away, because there's going to be other guys knocking on the door.
The outfield gets less crowded after that, because then the next generation of outfielders is a little bit further away. Then it becomes more infielders. Like you've got Tyler Black, And that's the other thing with, like, because we haven't even talked about Santana in this question.
I mean, he's 37. He's almost done.
Right.
I was going to say, is he going to play next year?
Yeah, that probably unlikely. And I think first base next year seems like I don't know what you're doing with Rowdy. The Rowdy situation, I don't know where that is headed. But I mean, he could still come back next year. He still has arbitration years left, so Rowdy could be back next year. I think Tyler Black is a first baseman long term. I talked about this at length on the Minor League Extra. Mentioned it before on here. I think Tyler Black is a first baseman for this team if he's still on the club. Like, I think that's where he plays because I don't like him at third or second. And yeah, I think Yelich, with all the outfield guys, they have legitimately really good young outfielders. Yelich could be in conversation for first base as well. He was drafted as a first baseman. So moving him over to first base, it seemed kind of inevitable, even though he never, as far as I can tell, he's never played a professional inning at first base. But the Marlins, when they turned in the card to draft him, they drafted him as a first baseman. This is kind of bizarre.
Interesting. All right. One clarifying point on Canna. The buyout is actually only $2 million, not $5 million. So that just screams that he's probably not going to be here. I mean, if they weren't going to pay Hunter Renfroe $11.5 million, they're not going to pay Mark Canna that, right? So
well, but they could potentially with Canna
trade him,
right? You potentially pick it up and then trade him. So
sure,
who knows?
Who knows? All right. Next question. It comes from Jason Spitz, and it's not a question because he says, not a question. Sign Contreras to an extension. Do it yesterday. And we've got another Twitter question asking about that. So I guess, Steve, is that something you look at in the near term here, trying to lock in some cost certainty for Contreras?
I mean, I think with a lot of these young guys, if you can do that, yeah, you know, make an offer that makes sense for the team. And the player financially, you know, buying out a year or two of his service time, probably. But I don't know. Ryan's the one who likes to kind of calculate what deals would be. So I'd have to leave that to him.
What do you got, Ryan? Yeah,
so the last time I did this, I almost nailed it perfectly on Lucroy. And when I say the last time I did this successfully, it's been like a decade since I nailed one of these.
Years ago.
Yeah, it was literally 10 years ago. I'm trying to get the numbers up here, but my computer is being delayed, and I don't know why it would be doing that. The Contreras thing is a little bit funny in that so he's arbitration eligible in 2025, so he actually has one more pre-Arby year in 2024. And then the 3 arbitration years in 25, 26, 27, and then he'd be a free agent for 2028. I would think any deal would need to be probably about 5 years. So it'd maybe buy out 1 year of 1 year of free agency, and then maybe a year or possibly 2 of team options on the end of that would be sort of the general framework I would look at. And then, you know, a decent signing bonus up front, and then a slightly elevated salary for that 1 year still of league minimum he has coming. So something like, you know, $2-3 million this year, as a bonus, and then $1 million in that first year, and then starting at like going like 4 to 7 to 10 to like 13 million, and then options for like 15. Now, I don't know.
Not gonna get it done.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, it all depends on what he and his agent have in mind, what he wants to do. Some guys just want to get that money and get it locked in right away. You saw with his brother Wilson went straight to free agency, and who knows if they are of the same mind on things like this. But, you know, Wilson never signed an extension with the Cubs. He just went straight to free agency. So you just don't necessarily know. But I think those are that's a general sort of framework for it. So I guess what would that be? That would be like a 5-year deal for about $50 million, I think, is what that works out to be, somewhere in that neighborhood, maybe a little bit less.
You're going to need more than that. He's already made an all-star game. He's already quote unquote an all-star. I feel
Yes.
like that kind of, blows up the pay scale there a little bit, but hey, we'll have all winter to dream about that. So we'll see where that goes.
I mean, from the PR standpoint, would it be worth it to pay a little extra and get that extension done? I mean,
yeah,
with the way things have been going,
Corbin this winter.
Well, yeah. They might need to throw up a smoke screen somewhere if they're going to do something like that.
Yeah, I mean, now is kind of the time when if you're going to extend a guy, and the other thing to remember here is that William Contreras isn't particularly young. He's already 25 years old. He's not going to hit free agency, even if he doesn't do anything else. He'll hit free agency as a 29-year-old. So he's not.
I mean, he's a catcher. Catchers are usually behind.
And also, catchers generally get older faster. So they generally aren't really, great.
So maybe he's going to want that money before he hits 30.
I mean, it all just depends sort of on what him and his agent think he can get and what he wants to do, how much he likes being here, whatever. And I think it's also important to note that the Brewers do have a pretty credible catching prospect coming up behind him here in Caro, and they don't have to do anything with Contreras for quite a while. I mean, again, next year he's just at league minimum, and then you have 3 arbitration years. So it might be in the Brewers' best interest to just say, yeah, we'll just go year to year with him, and then 2-3 years from now, if Caro is the guy we hoped he would be, then he gives us a surplus of catching, and we can potentially trade William Contreras and get back a haul for him. So,
well, considering Contreras has been both the catcher and the DH when he hasn't been catching, I mean, I think they'll have room for a second catcher if he's legit.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah. I don't think it would. I'm talking 2-3 years down the line, Steve. I'm not talking like.
No, I understand that, but I'm saying with the way they're already using Contreras, if they believe that's a player that they can sign going forward, like he has a position outside of just being a catcher, which is useful.
Sure. Yeah. And I don't know if he could necessarily play first base, but that is also something that sometimes happens.
There's a DH now, so if he's got a bat that can just stay in the lineup, that's fine.
But also the thing is, if he continues to play like this at catcher, he's one of the best. He is one of the best defensive catchers in baseball at this point. Fangraphs, I think he's third on their list because that kid in San Francisco has turned out to be absolutely amazing. But yeah, Contreras has 15.6 defensive runs saved according to Fangraphs on here. So he's doing really, really well and has been worth 4.3 wins. He's now the leading Fangraphs WAR getter on the team this year because he's been so good defensively and offensively at a critical defensive position. That's what happens.
And Christian Yelich has sucked for a month, as Steve would point out.
There's always that as well. Yeah, it's funny. We all wondered coming into this year, there's no way that he could, like the 2.5 WAR he put up last year for Atlanta, that seemed like a stretch that you could potentially get that out of him. And he's at 4.3. I mean, if he keeps going like this, he's going to end up well over 5 for the season, and it's fantastic, obviously.
Yeah, and the price will go up too. All right. Let's wrap things up with the Patreons with a couple more well-wishers. We got PJ Wessels saying, happy 300th episode. Enjoy the weekend. Thank you for still doing this show. And then we have Morgoth 10 saying, happy 300. Question for this week. Any standout hilarious moments you can say are your favorites from over the years? So kind of fitting. We got 2 of the originals here in Steve and Ryan. So I guess, Steve, let's start with you first. What comes to mind? And he's like, no, I don't know. Other than the time you made Ryan blow up a baseball, I don't know.
Yeah, that was fun. Burning the baseball was a good time. Even though the playoff appearance didn't work out the way we wanted it to. No. It gave us content, I guess, for that time period. Ryan's like, I soaked this baseball in kerosene for, 12 hours or something like that. Or was it more than that?
No, I did it when I got home, and then you came over a couple hours later. It was only in there for a couple hours. But that thing went up like a chart. I mean, that thing burned, and there was nothing left, and it was gone pretty quick. And the music selection was impeccable. Your original Ewok Village celebration music from
the Yub Nub.
Yep, the Yub Nub song. Yep. That was a great musical cue for that one. I'm thinking of back when we used to record in your basement all the time. The occasional pop-ins from your son.
Oh yeah,
Those are always entertaining. And there was definitely a game, I think it was against the Cardinals, and I think it was 2019, where we were recording live as the Brewers won a walk-off. And I think it was in September of 2019 that we got that one. Or maybe we were recording while they were coming back, and then we ended, and then maybe we caught the end of it after that. But I remember that being a big party because that was in that magical run of 2019 when they just didn't lose anything. And that's when Craig Tember, the phrase actually took off, was that September, even though it really started in 2018 was
18, yeah.
Right. They had a great September 2018, but their 2019 was even better and even weirder because Christian Yelich got hurt relatively early in that run, and they just kept on winning anyway. So that was super bizarre that magical ride was just, that was pretty unbelievable. Try to think what else. Some of the stuff that came out of the pandemic was pretty good. James, you mentioned some of these.
We got weird when we had nothing to talk about. So
we had to. Every podcast got weird during that time.
Yeah. Period. No, I know we did some Brewers all-time drafts. I took Dave Nielsen as my catcher, and you all laughed at me, but I will go to the grave defending Dave Nielsen's honor. Very underrated. I know there was the whole St. Louis ravioli as a Pop-Tart discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Was that, I think that was Paul, and then Brad would get very upset about that line of argument because that all started with everything as a salad, right? So and then St. Louis ravioli is just a Pop-Tart and everything is cake. And I just remember Brad like standing up and walking out of the room at one point. We got him so wound up on that. That was great.
Yeah, the everything is cake one was Brad definitely enjoying that one. And then when we talked about like your favorite traditions, or when we didn't have an opening day in 2020, we got together and talked about our opening days, and that's Paul's infamous no deuces in the bucket story.
Yes.
Which you have to go back and listen to that episode to get the no deuces in the bucket story. But you were on that episode too, Steve. You came back for that one. I remember.
So. Yeah.
I'm like a goldfish with these episodes.
Every day is exactly the same. No, I mean there's a lot of good ones, and those are just kind of the couple that like pop to mind, and in terms of just us like laughing uncontrollably and going so far off the rails. But definitely lots of good memories over 300 episodes. I obviously haven't been here for all of these, but I thank you guys very much for welcoming me in. A few years now. I forget how long
you've been here longer than Steve has now.
I was gonna say you've probably been here longer than both. Mm-hmm. Yeah, JP and I.
Wow.
Yeah, wow. JP and Steve left at about 120, 130, somewhere in there, and we're at 300 now. So yeah, you've hosted the show more than Steve has, even with his occasional comebacks for guesting. Yeah.
Because we started right at the trade deadline in 2017.
Okay. We did. Yep, we started that summer.
Yeah, JP and I went through
2020,
basically,
or 2019.
2019, yeah.
Yep, and then with the new crew came in 2020, and we had Brad for that first year, and then Brad had to leave after
reasons.
After 2020. Yeah. So.
Because the joke was when JP and I were on the podcast, there were baseball seasons to talk about.
Yes.
And
then
when everybody else joined,
there was no baseball. We were the bad luck charm. Yeah,
there's no baseball anymore. We just got to do a lot of labor talk. That's the other one.
God, yeah.
James having to like go through and do, okay, it's time for labor talk, and just the agony on your face. Like every time that happened, I just
my God.
But it was
so much
fun, and we were able to do, I think it was where we've done some of our most substantive work on stuff, because a lot of that stuff is really complicated, and it helps to have a lawyer who can break some of that stuff down for you and give you a real idea of what's going on with that stuff. So
well, it's also interesting when it's like, oh, I want baseball, but it's like, well, no, things are complicated.
Well, exactly.
There's more going on than, we're all sitting here looking for something to do, but there's a lot of factors going into all of that. So you had both the negotiation to start that season, and then obviously the labor negotiations, because I mean, how many seasons have you guys done that started on time? 2 out of 4.
Maybe. Yeah, because
I think every other
year, and then there was the pandemic year. Yeah, exactly.
Every other year you get an uninterrupted season. So we got some shit coming towards us next year. I
can't wait until next year.
Yeah, and 2021 was, even though it started on time, it didn't start with really fans in the stands on a full basis. So that season was weird too. It started, that was with the half the seats at the stadium, or 3/4 of the seats at the stadium were zip tied to begin that year. So that was a weird year too. Like just going back to the park and being in baseball stadiums again was weird. So yeah, it always gets me when I go and put in the episode information. This is our 7th season because we started well into that first season, so into the 2017 season. But yeah,
I think I started. I reset the seasons or jumped to the next one with spring training in February.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I still do that. When we hit our first episode of the year is when I do it for the new season. I think I go a little bit longer than you did, and then. But yeah, it's wild. It's really a lot of fun. I had no thought because JP and I did a podcast, the old Bernie's Crew podcast.
I was going to ask, how many Bernie's Crews did you guys do?
I think there were 40 or 50 of those. We did them for the better part of a year, and then he got busy with grad school and doing all those things.
Doctorates. Who needs those?
Yeah. So that just kind of delayed things out there. But
yeah, Ryan asked him to pop in today, and he's like, "I have better friends that I'm doing stuff."
Yes.
Well, I don't need you losers anymore.
With him, he said he had people coming from out of town, and it was like, well, yeah, he lives on the West Coast, so yeah, that's definitely the priority. Like you gotta do that. But
I'll admit, I got added to their Liverpool group, and.
Yes. So
my Sunday mornings, it's just like ping, 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 ping. I'm like, Jesus, okay, I get it. I'm like, there were only 3 goals. This is a lot of notifications.
Yes, we did. That really hasn't come up on the podcast yet, but that was always something you would joke. That was one of the original running jokes of the podcast was Ryan and JP are talking about soccer and Steve's over in the corner napping. So that was one of the original gags, and Steve has now joined the Liverpool fray and watches a good chunk of those games now. So you're watching more than you don't watch, aren't you? At this point,
I do. I appreciate one that like the time is basically like just around 2 hours.
Yes,
and 2, it's basically like Sunday morning. So I'm like, I get up, I do breakfast. And the game's just on, and then it's over, and I'm like, "Hey, look at that!" The rest of the day still. So I appreciate that brevity.
Yeah, those games, especially the ones that don't have like knockout. You're playing a 90-minute game with a little bit of extra time on the ends, and it's over in that window, and you don't have to worry about 4-hour games. There's none of that nonsense. So it just that is kind of nice. So
yeah, I look forward to the next 300, I guess, and in all of those. And, we have Paul for the labor talk, and Steve, we always have you for stadium funding discussions if you want to join us for those.
Speaking of funny things, I still have a file of stuff that I couldn't air. Think of what Steve did say in that episode. There's a whole bunch that I couldn't include in there and didn't include in there. I also have some Brad After Dark material that sits on my desktop as well that he has to hope will never see the light of day. So yeah, I've got some blackmail material from those episodes. I don't think there's anything from before that we got particularly crazy on. From 1.0, I don't think you don't have any old files sitting around of stuff that had to be taken out of the pod. Did you, Steve?
No, and I think I might have actually cleaned a lot of that out because those are big ass files.
Yeah,
I just remember there for a time the most recent review for this podcast, which go leave a 5-star review for us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify if you can. But there was one review that was like, why are they all so mean to Ryan? And I remember that. And since that day, Ryan has now vowed to take us down with any blackmail he has on us, so we have to be nice to him. Yeah.
Well, you are always impeccably careful about everything. So I anticipate getting no blackmail on you ever. Like that would be surprising if I ever got any.
By the way,
on you.
After all of that, it's taken 300 episodes, but move the request for 5 stars to the top of the podcast.
Yeah, nobody
rundown.
listens to this shit.
Yeah, so that way they don't have to get through all of this garbage at the end and then go, oh yeah, I should leave a review.
And that's the other thing is every time James reads the copy here, he's still reading essentially Steve's original copy from episode
I tweak
1.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, but the bones of it are largely the same, and it's the same over on the minor league extra side too. That's stuff I wrote for the first time I did it.
It's not like this is the only podcast that waits for the call for 5 stars at the very end. Like everybody does that. And then I was thinking like, no, you say it at the beginning when people actually hear it. So there you go. That's my advice before I leave.
All right, thanks. You'll get an EP credit going forward. Thanks, Steve. All right. I appreciate everybody, especially all of you listening, whether it's for 300 episodes or just a couple, or you're just dropping in on this one, thank you so much for spending your time and listening to us ramble on for like 90 minutes every week. Definitely well appreciated. So thank you very much. And actually, before we go, we do have one Twitter question. Before we go, we still do those as long as the site's still up. So C. Paul Martin is saying, happy episode 300, guys. Make a top 3 wish list of things to go right for the Brewers to win the World Series. So
this was to nice win note. The World Series. Oh, I thought this was aside from the Brewers winning the World Series. My thing was going to be, so aside from the Brewers winning the World Series, was just Jackson Chourio becomes like a Hall of Famer and a career Brewer and all of that. But now this is a different framing of the question, so I'll have to think about this.
Well, that can kind of factor in. So I guess, Steve, what 3 things have to go right for the Brewers to win a World Series?
Yelich not sucking would be number 1.
Yes. Figured
on brand.
Corbin Burns not letting the team down at the end of the season would be number 2.
Okay. And number 3?
And then extending Craig Counsell before the end of the year would be number 3. I don't know how that would help them with the World Series, but I want that done regardless. That would just make me feel better.
It would make me feel better too. Like that would be, I could feel a lot better about things in general if that were to happen.
As opposed to this kind of being the last stand potentially, right? So yeah, okay. Ryan, I guess your 3 things.
Yeah, I mean, I would say things that they need to go right for them to win the World Series. Willy Adames is going to have to be like a superstar. He's going to have to play like a truly great superstar player for them to be able to do that. And they're going to need to get a huge lights out contribution from Freddie Peralta. I think that's also like critical here. That is the difference between them and other teams potentially for the playoffs, is they have a third starting pitcher who's a legitimate stud when he's right. So they need that from him as well, for him to do that. And I would say, like, honestly, like something out of like this Trevor McGill thing has to continue. We didn't talk about McGill at all, but he really has kind of evolved into a shutdown guy at the back end there for them. Even though he hasn't really been pitching in with close leads yet, but he has been, critical to some of these, like pitching in the 4-run win on Monday against the Cubs, and then did a job yesterday, even though he did end up giving up a run in the game on Saturday. But McGill being like another really, really good reliever, that gives them that extra element, I think, that would help them win.
For sure. How about Josh Donaldson not being a racist clubhouse cancer?
That would be nice, and hopefully we just don't have to deal with that. That would be great.
All right. I suppose it would. Yes. Just a generally nice thing to wish for, even if it doesn't help the Brewers win.
Right, exactly.
Series. All right. When you become a patron, in addition to getting that question priority, patreon.com/MKE Tailgate, you also get a shout out on the show when you join the family, so to speak. So, Ryan, who do we have this week to give thanks to?
Welcome to, and I'm assuming that this is Archon. It's got to be right. It's Archon. Yeah. Welcome to Ryan Connor, Archon, and also to Kyle Orcholski.
We'll go with that.
Orcholski, I think, is the right way to go with that. Yeah. So thank you, both of you, for joining in, and we do truly appreciate it. It helps us to be able to do this. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. And another running gag for the show over 300 episodes, Ryan not knowing how to pronounce people's names when we do this. So,
Well, originally it was JP that read those names for that exact reason, so that Ryan wouldn't mispronounce them. So it was always JP that did that.
All right. Well, thank you guys for joining up. And a reminder at patreon.com/MKE tailgate, as little as $2 a month, gets you that question priority. And you can help support us in another way. As Steve noted, I should do this at the start, but if you want to give us support by giving us a 5-star review, you can do that on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever else you listen to us. Hit that follow or subscribe button while you're there as well. You can also subscribe to us on YouTube. Just search for @MKE Tailgate there as well. This is a fun one, guys. Thanks for the trip down memory lane. Thank you for being here for 300 episodes. And who knows if we have 300 more or not. But regardless, we'll be back next week. We'll just keep it to that scope, looking ahead to next week and kind of look through the Brewers trips through Pittsburgh and New York against 2 last place teams. I'll say that while I still can. The Pirates and the Yankees in last place as well. So we'll recap all of that next week here. Thanks again, everybody. Have a good Labor Day weekend, and we'll see you here next time on Milwaukee's Tailgate.